Hi, and welcome to Watch It Played. My name is Rodney Smith, and in this video we're going to learn the 1 to 6 player game, Tiny Towns, which does not come in a tiny box. This was designed by Peter McPherson and published by AEG, who helped sponsor this video. Here, you're the mayor of a small but growing town in a forest where resources are scarce, and so is space. But the woodland citizens are still counting on you to make their village the most prosperous. So join me at the table, and let's learn how to play. To set up, find these building cards and sort them into piles based on their backs. Set the purple ones to one side for now, and you'll notice that except for this card, each other pile will have 4 cards in it, which should be shuffled individually. You'll then flip over one card from each to form a row, and then all the remaining face-down buildings you can return to the box. For your first game, they recommend using this specific set of buildings, so just pull these cards out directly if you want to. Now place all the resource cubes in a pile nearby, and these represent wood, wheat, brick, glass, and stone. Also sort the various building pieces into piles by their cards, matching their shape and color to the one found in the upper right-hand corners here. You'll also find that you have these purple ones left over. These are monuments, and you can deal 1 to each player. We'll be setting up a 2-player game in this video, and then you can return the rest to the box. Now shuffle and deal 2 monument cards to each player, which they should look at, but keep secret from the other players. Each person will select one to keep, placing it face down near their monument piece and returning the others to the box. Also give each player one of these boards and the first player token to the last person who constructed something in real life. Or you can just assign this randomly. And that's the setup. In Tiny Towns, players will be collecting a variety of different resources, which they will then place on their boards in different shapes, and the different shapes will allow them to build different types of buildings. And the buildings will provide you with points and abilities. But you only have a limited amount of space to work with, so you'll want to carefully plan each construction. The game is played over a series of rounds, and each round is broken into 4 steps. The first step is for the player with the Master Builder token to name any one type of these resources. Maybe they say wood. Then, as step 2, all players must take a cube of this resource, and then they must also put it into any empty square of their town grid. Again, the space they choose must be empty, and a cube, once placed, cannot be moved from the spot you put it in, so pick your spot carefully. For the third step, players may construct any buildings they're eligible to build. Just make sure you announce out loud which structures you're placing. As you can see, each of the types of buildings has a pattern shown here. And if that pattern exists in your grid, then you can construct that building if you want to. For example, after a few rounds of players calling out and collecting resources, I might have cubes on my grid like this, which means I could build the chapel. The arrangement can exist in any mirrored, flipped, or even rotated form of this pattern, so long as the configuration and resources remain the same. Either way, to add a structure, you then remove the resources being used to build it, putting them back in the general supply, and then you take the matching wood building, as shown here, and put it into any one of the squares that you just pulled a cube from. So I could have put it in any one of these 4 spaces. If you have a building that you could construct, that doesn't mean that you have to build it. You could wait until a later round, or even not build it at all. The choice is up to you. You can even build multiple buildings at the same time, assuming you have the resources laid out in their various patterns. If you are trying to build more than one thing at once, just make sure you never use the same resource for 2 different buildings. For example, these 4 cubes here would help you build the theater, but these could also be used to build a well. But I can't do both at once because they would both need this single cube. I'd have to pick one or the other. Now, once placed, a building cannot be moved. So you have to be careful because new resource cubes can only be put into empty spaces, meaning that each building limits the space you have to work with for future shapes you're trying to make. So now if I wanted to make a theater out of these 3 pieces, I wouldn't be able to because there's no space here to place this cube. It would have been smarter for me to build the well over here, so then on a future turn I could place a resource here, allowing me to then place the theater. In addition to the face-up buildings here, each player will have their own personal private monument, which is another type of building that only they can construct. You do this during any round when you could normally add a building to your grid, which is step 3 during a round. You just flip this card over and then construct it in the same way as any other regular building, placing your monument piece on any one of those previous resource spots. You should also read out loud any effect written here. Some will have an immediate result, which should resolve now, while others will have an ongoing ability. Either way, the effects of the card will only apply to the player who constructed it. So why are we building all of this stuff anyway? Well, many of these buildings at the end of the game will provide you with points. Others will give you some kind of ongoing benefit, and some will do both. And this is all explained on the cards themselves and in greater detail here at the back of the rulebook if you need some more information. Now, we won't go over all the different types of buildings that come in the game, but let's at least go through the ones that we have here in this game setup. This is a farm. It produces no points itself, but it feeds 4 buildings that have this symbol anywhere in your town. The cottage is the only building in our setup that has that icon, which you'll find here. And this will provide you with 3 victory points if the cottage is fed. This here is the symbol for victory points in the game. So if our town looked like this, all of these cottages are worth nothing. However, if we added a farm, then at least 4 of them would be fed, so then we'd get 12 points. We'd actually need to build another farm if we wanted to get points for our 5th cottage. The chapel gives us 1 victory point for each cottage we have that's been fed. So if we had 4 cottages being fed, as we have here, this church would be worth 4 points, and if we had a second chapel, this would also be worth 4 points. A well gives you 1 point for each cottage adjacent to it, even if that cottage is unfed. So this well here is worth 3 points, and this one is worth nothing. In tiny towns, adjacent means up, down, left, or right, but not diagonal. This is a tavern, and these will score you points based on how many you've built as a group, no matter where they are on your board. If you've built 3 taverns, like we have here, then you'll score a total of 9 points. But if you've built 5, then you'll score 20 points. However, building any more than 5 will not give you any extra points. A theater is worth 1 point for each other unique building in the same row and column as it. So you would ignore other theaters or duplicate buildings. In this arrangement, our theater here has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 unique buildings in its column and row, so it scores its maximum of 6 points. Now, if these buildings were here instead, it would only score 4 points. 1, 2, 3, 4. You'd ignore other theaters and duplicate buildings. Lastly, we have the factory. When this is built, you immediately place any one resource on top of it, and from now on, when any player names that resource during the first step of a round, instead of collecting it like you normally would, you can choose to take any one other resource instead. And those are the rules for buildings. And after all players have placed their resource and constructed any buildings they wish to, the master token is passed clockwise and a new round begins. Rounds will continue like this, and eventually a player will find that their town is filled with resources and they cannot or do not want to construct any new buildings. In that case, their town is complete. They are out of the game and can start calculating their final score. Now that said, as long as you have spaces to put resources, you can stay in the game even if it's not possible to construct more buildings. And you may want to do this just to have the chance to be the master builder again and continue declaring resources. This can be quite powerful when you can see what the other players are after and you want to prevent them from getting it. For example, I think this player here is trying to construct a cottage next to this well. They need a wheat for that to place either here or here, so I'll declare glass instead, which they'll be forced to place. Either way, once you're out of the game, the others will keep playing until only one player is left. And then they will continue to name resources as the sole master builder, continuing rounds until either they choose to stop or they have no more legal moves, which will then end the game. All players now locate and remove from their town any resource cubes sitting alone in a space. You can now use one of these scoring sheets on the included scoring pad to gain points for each of the buildings as we previously saw, not forgetting to gain any points from your specific monument if it provides them, and then you lose 1 point for every empty space of your town grid. The player with the most points wins. In the case of a tie, the tied player who had the fewest turns as the master builder wins, so make sure you keep track of who started the game. If there's still a tie, the tied player with the fewest empty spaces wins. If there's still a tie, the tied player with the most cottages wins. And if there was still a tie, the tied players share the victory. I should also mention that resources and the various buildings are meant to be unlimited. If you run out of any one of these, just use a suitable replacement. And don't forget, each time you play, you'll be able to fully randomize the buildings that are available to construct, giving you new challenges each time. There's also a Town Hall rule set which changes how resources are distributed using this included deck, and there's also a solo variant, but I'll leave those for you to discover on your own. Otherwise, that's how you play Tiny Towns. Now, if you have any questions about anything you saw here, feel free to put them in the comments below, and I'll gladly answer them as soon as I get a chance. You'll also find forums for discussion, pictures, other videos, and lots more over on the games page at Board Game Geek, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like, subscribing, and clicking that little bell icon so you get notifications anytime one of our videos goes live. But until the next episode, thanks for watching.